claiming lives and breaking hearts. At the lonesome train station in Cheyenne, a woman sat frozen on a wooden bench, her breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. She clutched a small leather bag containing everything she owned: $3, a faded photograph, and a heart full of dreams that seemed as cold as the night itself. What happened next would become the most talked-about love story, from the Colorado River to the Canadian border, changing two lives forever and making history in the untamed American West. The wind cut through Cheyenne like a knife through butter that December night. Elizabeth "Libby" Montgomery pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to keep out the cold. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, and her lips were turning blue. The last train east had left 3 hours past, and the next wouldn't come until morning, if the storm didn't block the tracks. Libby had been a nurse back in Philadelphia, working in the charity hospital where she'd learned to tend wounds, deliver babies, and comfort the dying. But when the scandal broke, when Dr. Harrison tried to force himself on her and she'd fought back, breaking his nose with a bedpan, nobody would believe her word against his. The hospital dismissed her, and word spread through the medical community like wildfire. No respectable hospital would hire her, so she'd taken what little money she had and bought a train ticket west, hoping to find work in one of the mining towns where they were desperate for anyone with medical knowledge. But her money had run out in Cheyenne, and the boarding house had turned her away when she couldn't pay for another night. Now she sat on this hard bench, watching her breath fog in the air, wondering if she'd freeze to death before dawn. Her small leather medical bag sat beside her, the only thing of value she owned, containing her surgical tools, medicines, and the few certificates that proved her training. The sound of horse hooves on frozen ground made her look up. Through the swirling snow, she saw a figure approaching on horseback. The man was large, wearing a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat, pulled low against the wind. As he drew closer, she could see his horse was a magnificent black stallion, and the man's clothes, though practical, were of fine quality. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then walked toward the station. His boots were expensive. Leather, she noticed, and he moved with the confident stride of a man accustomed to having his way. When he pushed through the station door, a gust of wind and snow followed him inside. "Evening, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and warm, with the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas. "Mighty cold night to be sitting out here alone." Libby tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She managed a small nod. The man studied her with concerned eyes. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and a mustache, and despite the rough weather, he was clean-shaven and well-groomed. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but his eyes were kind. "Name's Jackson Jack Thornton," he said, pulling off his gloves. "I own the Double T Ranch about 20 miles north of here. Been in town on business and was heading home. When I saw you through the window." He noticed her medical bag and the way she was dressed. Her clothes were quality but worn, and she had the bearing of an educated woman despite her obvious poverty. "Are you a doctor, miss?" he asked gently. "Nee, nurse," Libby managed to say through chattering teeth. "Elizabeth Montgomery, from Philadelphia." Jack's eyes widened. A trained nurse was rarer than gold in Wyoming territory. Most towns were lucky to have a barber who could pull teeth and set bones. "Miss Montgomery, you're going to freeze to death if you stay here much longer," he said, his voice filled with concern. "The storm's getting worse, and this station isn't heated. Please, let me take you somewhere warm." Libby looked at him with a mixture of hope and wariness. She'd learned not to trust men too easily, but she was desperate. And something about this Jack Thornton seemed different from the men she'd known back east. There was a gentleness in his manner despite his obvious strength. I don't have money for a hotel," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not your concern right now," Jack said firmly. "Getting you warm and fed is what matters. We can sort out the rest later." He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, still carrying his body heat, made her gasp with relief. The coat smelled of leather, horses, and something else, perhaps pine soap. "Can you walk?" he asked. Libby tried to stand, but her legs were too stiff from the cold. Without hesitation, Jack scooped her up in his arms, her medical bag included. She was light as a feather, he thought, and trembling like a leaf in a windstorm. "The hotel's just across the street," he said, carrying her toward the door. "We'll get you warmed up and fed, and then you can tell me what brings a trained nurse to Wyoming territory in the middle of winter." As they stepped out into the storm, Libby found herself pressed against Jack's chest, his strong arms holding her securely. For the first time in months, she felt safe. She didn't know this man, didn't know his intentions, but somehow she trusted him. Maybe it was the desperate situation, or maybe it was something in his eyes, a kindness she hadn't seen in far too long. Before we roll back time, tell us where you're tuning in from, and hit subscribe for more Wild West tales. The Cattleman's Hotel was the finest establishment in Cheyenne, and when Jack Thornton walked through the front door carrying a half-frozen woman, every head in the lobby turned. The desk clerk, a thin man named Perkins, hurried over with obvious concern. "Mr. Thornton, sir, what happened?" "Found this lady at the train station near frozen to death," Jack said, still holding Libby in his arms. "I need your best room, and send up hot food, coffee, and plenty of blankets. Also get Doc Williams if he's still in town." "Right away, sir," Perkins said, grabbing a key from the board. "Room 12, second floor. Shall I help carry her?" "I've got her," Jack replied, heading for the stairs. Libby was aware of the stairs, and whispers as Jack carried her through the hotel, but she was too cold and exhausted to care about her reputation. The warmth of the building was making her fingers and toes tingle painfully as feeling returned to them. Jack carried her into a spacious room with a large bed, a fireplace, and fine furniture. He set her gently on a chair by the fire and immediately began building up the flames. "The hotel will send up some ladies' clothes," he said, not looking at her as he worked with the fire. "Yours are damp from the snow. We need to get you warm and dry." A knock at the door announced the arrival of hot coffee, soup, and blankets. Jack tipped the boy generously and sent him away, then poured Libby a cup of coffee with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size. "Drink this slowly," he said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Too much heat too fast can be dangerous." Libby sipped the coffee gratefully, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "You seem to know something about medicine yourself," she observed, her voice growing stronger. Jack smiled. "You learn a few things running a ranch. Men get hurt, animals get sick, and the nearest doctor might be 100 miles away." He pulled up another chair and sat across from her. "But I'm no trained nurse. What brought you west, Miss Montgomery? If you don't mind my asking." Libby studied his face in the firelight. He had honest eyes, she decided, and after what he'd done for her tonight, he deserved some explanation. "I worked in a hospital in Philadelphia," she said carefully. "There was trouble. A doctor who wouldn't take no for an answer. When I defended myself, I was dismissed. No hospital back east would hire me after that." Jack's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash in his eyes. "A man forced himself on you?" "He tried to," Libby said. "I broke his nose with a bedpan." Despite the serious nature of the conversation, Jack's mouth twitched with the hint of a smile. "Good for you. I hope it hurt." "It did," Libby said, and, for the first time in months, she almost smiled too. "But it cost me my career. I thought maybe in the West, where doctors are scarce, my past wouldn't matter so much." "It doesn't," Jack said firmly. "Out here, we judge people by what they do, not by the lies told about them back east. A trained nurse is worth her weight in gold in this territory." Another knock interrupted them, and a hotel maid entered with an armload of women's clothing. "Begging your pardon, sir, but these are the finest we have. Mrs. Patterson in room 8 donated them. She said any woman caught in this storm deserves all the help we can give." "Thank Mrs. Patterson for her kindness," Jack said, standing. "I'll wait downstairs while Miss Montgomery changes." "Mr. Thornton," Libby called as he reached the door. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." Jack paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone in the world," he said quietly. "And maybe because I've been praying for someone like you to come along." "Someone like me?" "A healer," he said. "My ranch hands get hurt regular, and I've lost good men because there was no one to tend them properly. But more than that, he turned to face her fully. I've been looking for someone special, someone with strength and courage, someone who'd break a man's nose rather than let him take. With that, he left the room, closing the door gently behind him. Libby sat by the fire staring at the closed door. She'd expected many things when she came west, but she'd never expected to meet a man like Jackson Thornton. Rich enough to own his own ranch, kind enough to help a stranger, and respectful enough to leave her alone to change clothes without being asked. She looked at the clothes the maid had brought, a simple but well-made dress of blue wool, undergarments, stockings, and even a pair of boots that looked like they might fit. As she changed out of her damp, travel-stained clothes, she couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt a spark of hope. Libby woke to sunlight streaming through the hotel window and the distant sound of voices from the street below. The storm had passed, leaving the world covered in pristine white snow. She'd slept better than she had in weeks, warm and safe for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. A soft knock at the door made her sit up. "Miss Montgomery? It's Jack Thornton." "Just a moment," she called, quickly braiding her long brown hair and smoothing the borrowed dress. When she opened the door, she found Jack standing in the hallway with a breakfast tray. "Morning," he said with a smile that made her heart skip. "Thought you might be hungry. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. "Mr. Thornton, I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Jack," he corrected, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "And you don't owe me anything, though I was hoping we might talk about your plans." They sat across from each other, as Libby ate the hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and jam. The food was delicious, and she realized how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal. "I don't have many plans," she admitted. "I was hoping to find work in one of the mining camps, but I'm not sure how to get there, or even which camps might need a nurse." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Mining camps are rough places for a woman alone. Dangerous, too. Most of those men haven't seen a decent woman in months, and they don't always remember their manners." "I can take care of myself," Libby said with quiet determination. "I'm sure you can," Jack agreed. "But there might be another option. My ranch covers 50,000 acres, and I employ about 60 men year-round. During roundup and branding season, that number goes up to nearly 100. These men work hard and get hurt regular. Broken bones, cuts, burns, snake bites, you name it." Libby set down her coffee cup, interested. "You're offering me work?" "I'm offering you a position as the ranch's nurse," Jack said. "Good pay, comfortable quarters, and all the medical supplies you need. You'd have your own cabin near the main. House and Cookie, that's our cook, would make sure you're well fed." It sounded almost too good to be true. "What would you expect in return?" Jack's expression grew serious. "Honest work for honest pay. Tend the men when they're hurt, help with difficult births among the livestock when needed, and maybe teach some of the hands basic first aid. Nothing more than that. And you'd expect nothing personal." Understanding dawned in Jack's eyes. "Miss Montgomery, Libby, I'm not the kind of man who'd take advantage of a woman's desperate situation. If something personal were to develop, between us it would be because we both wanted it, not because you felt obligated." Libby studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but his eyes were clear and honest, and everything about his behavior since finding her had been that of a gentleman. "How far is your ranch?" she asked. 20 miles north. It's called the double T after my initials, Jackson Thomas Thornton. We raise cattle and horses, some of the finest in Wyoming territory. The work is hard but honest, and the men who ride for me are good people." "You said you've been looking for a healer. Haven't you tried to hire a doctor?" Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've tried. Posted notices in newspapers from Denver to Kansas City. Most doctors want to practice in towns where they can build a profitable practice treating wealthy patients. Ranch work is too uncertain, too dangerous, and not profitable enough for most of them." "But you'd hire a woman?" "I'd hire anyone with the skills and courage to do the job," Jack said firmly. Out here, we care more about what a person can do than whether they wear pants or a dress. Libby considered the offer. It was better than anything she'd dared hope for, but it seemed too perfect. There had to be a catch. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. Jack smiled appreciatively. Smart as well as skilled. "All right, here's the truth of it. The Double T is a working ranch, not a fancy estate. The winters are hard, the summers are hot, and we're 20 miles from the nearest town. You'd be the only woman on the ranch most of the time except for Cookie's wife Martha,